Thank you for joining us in person and thank you for joining us online. So it's a delight to have you here. My name's Tim Vorley. I'm Pro Vice Chancellor and Dean of the Business School, and I have to say that I could well be sitting in the audience as an interested member of the public wanting to know more about the topic of sustainable food. So what I'm hoping that we will do over the next hour or so, we have a highly esteemed panel, many of whom have different links to Oxford Brookes University, and are going to enlighten us with their perspectives, and we'll move it into a bit of a conversation. If you have questions, we'll move into a Q&A towards the end of the panel session, and we will also be able to take questions from those online as well. So if you do have questions, they will come through, hopefully, if the technology works, to my iPad, so I could take those as well, and we'll incorporate them into the conversation. So rather than me introducing all of the panel, we've agreed among us that what we're going to do is we will go along the line from Andy at the far end right the way down to Sienna at this end, not only introducing themselves and giving a little bit of context, but also telling us about what they understand about the issue to do with sustainable food. I think one of the really interesting things in having the opportunity to chair this evening is that the notion of sustainable food is not only of huge societal importance and significance, particularly in the current climate, but it intersects with so many different issues, ranging from innovation, business models, systems thinking, to equity, social justice and environmental challenges. And I think many of those topics we will cover across the next hour or so. So without further ado, Andy, I'm going to hand over to you to introduce yourself, say hello, and give us your take and perspective on sustainable food.
Yeah, so Andy, Oxford Brookes alumni. So I left here in 2002. This is the first time I've been back since 2002, so it's a very different place, but thank you for having me. Shall I introduce myself and then, yeah, okay. So my background, I'm an entrepreneur in sustainability, really. I left uni, I worked a little bit in big business, and then set up an organisation tackling climate change, multiple organisations tackling climate change, sold one of those to a large corporation and stayed with them for a while, leading their sustainability transition. And then in 2020, I left there to set up another organisation called Pineapple, which, despite the name, doesn't have a direct link to food, but has a food-based name, at least. And we do a few different things in this sector. So what Pineapple does is brings large organisations together to form partnerships and create new business models that solve social and environmental issues. And in this space, we're doing a couple of things. So we've got a partnership with the World Bank and the World Health Organization and a bunch of corporates and a bunch of charities supporting female farmers in the food system in sub-Saharan Africa and India. We are working so front of mind, we're about to do something with the UK government and a bunch of, you could call them bad guys, but fast food companies to try and see how they can tackle childhood obesity within by changing the food system. And we are doing quite a lot of work within food supply chains, investing in biodiversity and nature restoration with large corporations, so trying to kind of reverse a lot of the unintended consequences that have come from production farming within food supply chains, and sort of restore natural habitats with indigenous people and a whole sort of bunch of different organisations. And what was the second thing? What's the food system? Oh, and so where we sit, I guess, and I guess our passion is really about what is sustainable food. I think it's really, to me, it's really at the heart of everything that we do. Clearly, we eat food. It comes from us. It comes from nature, and it's sort of critical to everything about us. So it's such a sort of integral thing. And so for me, sustainable food is incredibly complex. It's incredibly kind of systems-based. And it's really about creating new models and new ways of consuming and new relationships with food that help us to be more sustainable about the way that we consume, grow, everything. So.
Okay, I think that sets things up nicely, and I think already you'll get a flavour of the fact that there is an incredible breadth of expertise and experience on the stage. So Ashley, please dive in and introduce yourself.
Hi, my name's Ashley Cavers, and starting with my connection to Oxford Brookes, I'm not an alumnus, but I'm currently working with the business school, so Tim and his team, to deliver one of the business management programmes here at Oxford Brookes. It's called the Help to Grow programme. It's a government-funded programme supporting SMEs to basically grow bigger and to be able to scale, but scale in a sustainable way. But here with a few other hats on as well. I work on a local business support programme here in Oxfordshire, which is all about supporting social enterprises, charities, and purposeful businesses. And I like to count my own business as one of those purposeful businesses, and that's probably the main reason that I'm here tonight, as a co-founder of the Wonky Food Company. And we are a small business, started about 5 years ago here in Oxfordshire, and we make lovely products out of imperfect and surplus fruit and veg, so helping to tackle the problem of food waste. So we work with farmers to intercept those fruit and veg that are too big, too small, too wonky, too ugly. Some of those might be in a basket down there at the moment, and that get rejected by the supermarket. So we take those and we chop them up and turn them into great tasting relishes, and a lot of other products in the pipeline as well. And actually this week's quite a big week for us because we just launched into 250 national co-op stores. So we've gone from teeny tiny little business to a slightly bigger business. So that's quite exciting. What does sustainable food mean to me? Well, I guess obviously working in this space primarily, it's about minimizing the environmental impact of growing our food, but not just growing, it's how we harvest the food, it's how we treat that food when it's in our fields. It's also how we package that food, it's how we distribute the food. And also it's how we as consumers buy that food, store that food, consume that food. We're all about tackling food waste at the Wonky Food Company, but actually it's consumers, it's us at home that are the biggest contributors to food waste. We create 70% of all the food waste that there is just by buying too much, not planning our meals, throwing away those 2-for-1 salad bags that we've picked up at the supermarket. So that's where a lot of the work has to be done. So it's about that environmental impact, but increasingly, and I think there'll be others that can talk about this more eloquently than me, but food sustainability is also about food security. It's about food access. It's about giving everybody access to healthy, nutritious food.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Ashley, and congratulations on making the co-op. So next up, we've got Matt.
Thanks, Tim. Good to meet you all. My name is Matt Lane. I graduated from Brookes in 2008. I studied business. In 2012, I started a business called Beer Bods, which was a beer subscription service, kind of like Laithwaites, but for craft beer. So we featured lots of different beers from small independent brewers and sent them to our customers all over the country. I sold that business in 2019 to the world's largest brewer called AB InBev, so quite a different kind of size and scope to what I was running with a small team in rural Worcestershire. And then following the acquisition, I actually went to lead a different business for AB InBev called Perfect Draft. So we have about 200,000 customers across the UK. We sell at-home beer dispensers. We kind of like describe it as the Nespresso for beer. We sell 40 different beers on it, and I suppose we're trying to pioneer a sustainable return loop. So all of the beer we send to our customers are in returnable kegs that we refill and send back to customers. So we're aiming for zero waste. I'm also a non-executive director of Mid-Counties Cooperative, which is a role I've done for 9 years. So I'll have both of those hats on this evening. I suppose, what does food sustainability mean to me? If I try and put those two hats on, it means quite different things. I'm gonna read, and the reason I'm doing this is because food sustainability at Mid Counties Cooperative isn't what I think it should be. It isn't even what our executives think it should be. It's what our members who own the society say it should be. So we focus on 3 core areas of food sustainability, which are sustainable sourcing, minimizing food waste, and more recently, the core area that we're focusing on is food justice activity, which is about ensuring food is distributed to those in need and helping alleviate food poverty, particularly in the regions in which we operate. I suppose in my day job at Perfect Draft, food sustainability is around innovation, working for the world's largest brewer around packaging innovation and how we can get beer to and from people in more sustainable ways.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Saman.
Good afternoon, everyone. My pleasure here. Is that okay? Yeah. My name is Saman. I'm a fractional lecturer here in the business school. Outside the business school, I've been a community volunteer for over 12 years. I currently do about 30 hours within the community. I set up non-entity initiatives, if that makes sense. I run a Facebook page called Community Ambassadors, and I kind of use that as a base to launch into different community centers, different initiatives. Currently, I'm a trustee for EDI with Sofia, which are the county and neighboring county warehouse for fair share in Hayne and all the way up to Milton Keynes. I'm also a trustee to multiple community centres and a few other charities. My understanding of sustainability is a bit different because, well, it links up to what you were saying about how much we waste at home, so at the user end of things. For me, it might be strange for some of you, but for me, sustainability is all about stigma and battling the stigma that we all carry around. When I go into primary school, secondary schools to do assembly sessions, I talk about picking up the yellow label in the supermarket, picking up the damaged box. And when I'm talking with my local MPM friends, it's about coming to initiatives like the larders that we have now. Everyone within Oxford is able to reach a community larder within 15 minutes walk. Making sure that you're on the front line of families collecting, even if you don't collect much, because the best way for me to tackle sustainability issues is inclusion and making sure that everyone feels included within the food conversation. And if we remove the stigma at every level, you'll find that a lot of the questions are answered automatically. So I use hashtags like Love Food Food Waste, I like you're familiar with. Fight Stigma is one of my famous hashtags. And share the love. And these are the stickers in my card and my books. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Hello, I am a secondary nutrition student here at Brookes. During my course, I was exposed to multiple lectures about the environment and how the food we eat affects both the environment and its impact on pollution. And that's why my research in food grew. And this is why I also participated in a project targeted at students. Its aim was to reduce leftovers by trying to implement them into new recipes and new meals. Because as a student who lives with others, I have noticed that a lot of people waste food without even thinking of reusing it, whereas it could be stored, it could be transformed into something completely different, like the recipes we saw earlier here on the screen. Also, I think that food sustainability should also be implemented into our diet in a nutritiously adequate way, because if we can't sustain our bodies we can, we won't be able to continue eating that way, and that wouldn't be something that we can keep up with.
Thank you very much for that. And this is Sienna. So, and it's particularly great to have Sienna here as a student who is innovative and helping address some of the challenges and the opportunities around sustainable food in real time. So thank you for making the time to come along this evening. I suppose kind of in thinking about the conversation, we've heard a range of perspectives, some of which relate to the system. Andy, you referred to the bad guys, of which we're not going to class Matt as one of the bad guys, but there's certainly, we've seen the big business in the mix as well. Right the way through that system down to us as individuals and the individuals in the communities and the societies that we're all participating in and part of. And at the other end of that, we've obviously got Saman there making a huge difference through the community larders and certain food banks that people have access to. If we are to try and see food sustainability really kind of prove as a concept, and we are to get to a position where it's sustainable, I guess one of the challenges is about changing the system. Matt, I'm going to come to you first, if I may, given the kind of the binary role that you've kind of got in there. I just wondered if maybe you'd be able to share a few thoughts on where we need to start, or where we could start thinking about that systems change.
Crikey. You could have pre-warned me about that one. Yeah, look, as a business, I think we how's that? Yeah, we're back on. Yeah, so as a business, I think there are lots of inputs for how we think about food sustainability in terms of that are influencing the system. So I suppose it starts with at the co-op and AB InBev. Am I okay carrying on using it? Yeah. I suppose the UN development goals are influencing us on both counts, both at the co-op and AB InBev. I think they're a great starter for the scope of change that we need to address, and really doing it in a way that's focused on all kinds of stakeholders all over the planet. And then I suppose from our perspective, we're looking at it from a customer angle as well. So at mid-counties, that means listening to members and where we should be focusing on change. And that's always evolving as well. You know, the areas in which we're focusing on in food sustainability are being driven by the communities that we serve. And often, and at AB InBev, that means customers all over the world. So I think, yeah, there are so many systems and so many inputs, but I think they're the two that are, I think, two big driving forces for us on food sustainability. One is the UN development goals, and the others are effectively customer demands and what our communities are asking us for and asking us to focus on when we think about food sustainability.
I think it's really interesting thinking about what drives that change, because I think in a lot of sectors, other than food, we see the consumer and what the consumer wants, the consumer awareness of some of these challenges becoming a real driver. And Andy, you mentioned some of the kind of the organisations that you're working with and the kind of reference there to the bad guys. But actually, the bad guys today have the opportunity to help change tomorrow. And I just wondered, kind of with what you're doing, how is that playing out? Is it pushing at an open door? Is there resistance around profitability? Or is the kind of the SDG angle that Matt referred to kind of well understood and a kind of a move towards what customers want?
I think it's a big question. I think it's a mixed bag. But I think that the first point you made, it's kind of, it has to be the key. So the company I sold my business to was a company called Schneider Electric, and I ended up working for their CEO, and he committed in 2015 $1 billion a year of R&D investment in the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And my job, I did a little project, it was turned into a 4-year project, but it was supposed to be a little project to look at sort of how do we create that alignment. And we're doing some stuff with the UN at the time and meeting with different governments. And I remember a guy saying that budget is bigger than the budget for innovation of most countries, or lots of countries, especially in this area. And I think that sort of struck a chord in sort of the role that these organisations can play, and fairly kind of unregulated role in a way, that they're sort of these international beasts that have the power to be able to manipulate systems in positive and negative ways. And so I think the world's kind of coming round, and a lot of the leadership in these organisations are coming round to the mindset and way of thinking, you know, partly driven by investor pressures, partly driven by just global pressures, partly driven by consumer pressures and consumer awareness, that, you know, they do have this sort of significant role to play in transition. But it's exactly that, it's transition, you know, it's systems transition, and it's incredibly complex. And there's so many competing interests, and there are so many sort of unintended, you know, if you change something, then something to trying to be good, then something else bad happens over here. And so it's infinitely complex. I don't even know what the question was now, I'm just going off on one. But yeah, I mean, I think it's there's definitely a role to play that big business has, and it's a really important fundamental role, especially in systems like the food system, which are so kind of interconnected and integral to sort of everything that we do.
Absolutely. No, I think you're right. It's where that driver comes from. So we're seeing it come from, in some cases, regulation, but is that effective? Is it what people think? Is it just that awareness of the need to do better? And I think that certainly with bigger businesses, we're seeing that. Ashley, I bring you in and maybe to reflect on that, but also really interested in your perspective as a smaller, purposeful business in this space, which isn't about having to try and respond to a consumer demand necessarily, but seeing an opportunity.
Yeah, and I just think that whole, you know, I've just seen the way businesses operate, that there's been a massive shift over recent years, and I think we need to move away from that kind of David and Goliath idea of the big bad businesses and then the small good businesses, and it's about collaborations and partnerships, and that is something that I think can affect real change. So you have small businesses like ours who you know, we have the freedom to be innovative. We can prototype new ideas. We can be ambitious. We can, you know, take a punt on things that larger businesses would not be able to do because of investor pressure or stakeholder pressure or multiple other reasons. But if we can be there as those prototypers, as those pioneers, and then the bigger businesses can learn from us and then support us and help us to grow. And that's exactly what's happened with us with Wonky, with the co-op, that we were selected to be part of an accelerator program that the co-op ran for sustainable businesses. And it's only through that we've been able to scale and grow, and through scaling we'll be able to create more impact. But then the co-op benefit from us just as we're benefiting from them, and it's that reciprocal benefit where, you know, the big guys can learn a lot from small innovative businesses, but let's face it, small innovative businesses need the operational reach and they need the financial clout that big business can bring. So if you can bring the best of both worlds together, then I think you can really make some significant change.
And I think that kind of resonates with what Matt was saying as well, where you had the business, you've grown the business has been bought out, but the insight moves back into some of the larger parent organisation in that context as well. Can I ask that we'll pass the mic down to Saman again. Saman, I'm interested in perhaps exploring kind of, you came in this evening with a basket of food, which was one of 6 that you were given by the co-op. And I guess thinking about that systems angle, the challenge, the kind of the justice element, that I observed that there seems to be a lot of tomatoes in the box at a time at which tomatoes were a rare commodity. It's certainly where I shop. But the way that you were talking is the relationship with the co-op in this instance, but also perhaps you could explain a bit about why we have so many tomatoes and why you do.
Should I explain the tomatoes?
Please, yeah.
So when I brought the crate in, because I made a colourful one for the stage, I was saying that over the last couple of weeks, when the countries, or most of us, assume there's a problem with tomatoes, they're not necessarily on every shelf. The local co-op has been giving me more tomatoes for the community curry that we cook 3 times a week. And when I look into it, and it's not the first time it's happened, I've been involved with this sector. Is that better? Yeah, okay. I'll work this. Is that better? Yeah, okay. So I've seen this happen again and again. It's not just tomatoes, where we ration things because there's a shortage, and guess what happens when a store manager has to ration things and hold things back? We end up with surplus again. So these tomatoes are potential landfill because there's a shortage of tomatoes, if that makes any sense. So we ration things, we say 2 packs per customer, 3 packs per customer. We hold it back behind the shop, behind the warehouse, and as we do that, we end up with leftovers that are going past the date, expiry, use by, whatever. And that's how these tomatoes have ended up here. And that's fine because if, and I wanted to link up with something you were saying again, big companies can learn from small community initiatives. When Sophia, this is going back to the beginning of the lockdown maybe, 3 years ago when Sophia started the larder model under the banner of Fair Share with a £3.50 subscription model where you pay £3.50 and come and collect once a week whatever surplus is there. I didn't see at a time that Aldi was looking at that, and only last month Aldi launched into the app Too Good To Go, and they've priced it exactly £3.50. And they're even using my hashtag, love food, hate waste. So you can go on the app and you get a random bag of goodies from Aldi, which is basically the larder concept. Other supermarkets, if you go to, some of them are better than others. Lidl was, I think, a couple of years even ahead of Aldi. They came up with these boxes by the till that had random stuff from that shopping, and you could just scan it for £1.50. That was really good value if you have the app. And families loved it, and it meant that the shop was wasting less. And please don't forget, I mean, those of you in the room who have, like me, any student or even more recent experience of working in big supermarkets, I've worked in the big Tesco on the Ring Road, Cowley, years and years ago, and big supermarkets still have compactors around the back. They still put tomatoes, peppers, pajamas, toys, all in the same compactor. Whether we like it or not, it's still happening out there, and it gets sent to places probably to be burned. So at store level, I think we're all responsible. If you see anything with a broken box, ask yourself, if you don't take that, who will? If it's safe to eat, go for it. And that's my message to school kids. Force your parents to pick up the damaged stuff. Because if you don't... Oh, and by the way, if some of you haven't worked in a big supermarket, please don't move things to aisles very far away and leave them there. Staff do not have time on a night shift to take it back. It ends up in landfill. So you know you pick up something on your trolley, you go 10 aisles down and say, actually, I don't want this, you put it away. Take it back to where it belongs, because if the staff don't have time, it ends up in landfill. And a lot of 24-hour stores, they're under so much pressure that the staff are told, you don't have time to run back and forth, moving things back. Put it in the bin by the aisle. So, yeah.
I think that there's so much kind of inspiring stuff, the kind of the stories and actually hearing the difference that you're making through the kind of community larders, what you're doing with the kind of food that you're making as well. And I think that it is really important that in a very fast-moving kind of consumerist, consumption-orientated society, that we just take a moment to think, taking that pause, thinking about what the implications of our actions are, because I think it really does come back down to us as individuals making a difference. And I guess on that, Sienna, your intervention in this space and thinking about food as a kind of a rare commodity and how you make the most of the food. Can you just tell everyone a little bit more about what you were doing with the student community and how you're trying to inspire that and kind of reinvigorate an awareness and passion for food among young people?
Yes, the project Student Love Student Leftovers, it was aimed at university students because this is a group of people that actually do waste a lot of food. And by living with them, I can notice that a lot of them don't really have appropriate cooking skills. And I mean, there could be a lot of reasons for that. But maybe a main one is because they were relying on their parents, and kind of university is that period of time when we kind of have to become more independent. But it could be difficult to just start learning a skill by yourself. So it would be very useful if there were more workshops, or even implementing that into a course, because it would be beneficial for all students. I mean, a part of sustainability is also food being affordable, and cooking is so much less expensive compared to ready meals, takeaways. And also a problem with takeaways is that also creates a lot of food waste, because people would get a large meal and then they wouldn't want to finish the leftovers, or wouldn't even try to implement them into a new recipe. Some people in our competition actually showed how we can do that. If we have like leftover rice, let's say, we could make a completely different meal with that. It was promoted on Instagram. I was in charge of a lot of the posts along with some business students. And it's very important to promote that across social media, because that's the main space people our age are.
I think it's really inspiring, and I mean the difference that it's making. And if you haven't seen the videos, if you haven't seen the material and the posts at the end of the event, do have a look on the screen behind us and look on the website. I think it really is the difference that it's making. And I think the use of the different means of communication, using social media, we've got Saman with his hashtags as well, making a difference and trying to make an impact, because it's very much about awareness. And I think one of the inspiring things that struck me in talking to all of the panel members prior to today is the innovation that they've all brought in their own ways to this kind of challenge that we face. I guess kind of thinking forward and thinking about next steps, trying to kind of be a better, more sustainable kind of participant in the food system, both through kind of the work that you folks do, but also it personally. I mean, what do you see as the kind of the next thing, the next challenge? How do we need to address that to be better? Or perhaps what do you as individuals look to do to be better? So Matt, I'll come to you first, if I may.
Yeah, I think doing it in a way that is convenient for customers and is affordable. There are two areas we really focus on. So I think having heady aspirations around food sustainability are all good and well, and it doesn't matter how good the intention is. If you can't make it accessible for people and affordable, and in flourishing societies convenient for them, then it's difficult to really make it work. So we spend, I think this is going back to this point about innovation in food sustainability being customer centric. That's what we spend our time on. So understanding from customers what they want in food sustainability. So that could be, for our members, that means supporting food bank at the co-op, and at Perfect Draft, that means convenience, so easily ordering and returning beer, and packaging waste. That's another thing that comes up again and again for our customers. So I think being customer centric and innovating around what they want from food sustainability, I think is what we're focused on.
I think the point that you make there is about that balance, isn't it? It has to be accessible, has to be affordable, and actually responding to the customer's needs. And Ashley, can I bring you back in on that as well? Because I think that when you were kind of talking earlier and I was kind of thinking about how, as a purposeful business, you're almost on the push side of that as much as the responsive side. And so what does that mean for kind of Wonky moving forward, and where you go with this to really elevate the mission of sustainable food?
Well, I think ultimately, if we do a good enough job, we're not going to have a business left, because, the supermarkets won't be wasting food anymore, and we'll do ourselves out of a job. But that would be a good reason to have failed, I suppose. I think, what can we do now? We have to I'm just very passionate about partnerships all along the way. So if we can partner with, technology innovators, there's so much interesting out there at the moment. If in doubt, just thump it. I was reading all about vertical farming the other day, which just blew my mind, that you can, grow lettuces and leafy vegetables, 20 feet tall inside, not, using up precious land and reducing the amount of water and energy that needs to be used. And I was racking my brains thinking, how can we get involved there? And what are their waste streams? And how can we partner and align? Or how can we tell other people about some of this work that's being done behind the scenes? And then it's just having those conversations. It's not assuming, not ever making assumptions about where the waste is coming from and what actions need to be taken, but talking to people who know more than I do. So talking to the farmers, where is the waste coming from now? I mean, we're deliberately called the Wonky Food Company. We started the business not because we have a passion for relishes, we have a passion for intercepting waste food. So if we end up not making relishes, making something else entirely, I'd love to find a fantastic recipe that uses bananas. If anybody can, come up with something that would be a commercial big seller that uses bananas, because bananas are one of the most wasted products, but it's really hard finding, banana relish doesn't really cut it. So, it's really kind of understanding at a ground level, what are the obstacles, what are the problems, where is the waste, being caused. And I think talking about on a personal level, maybe so going back slightly to an earlier question, what we can all do. I mean, what I try and tell people to do is just look on your doorstep. Look at the amazing food initiatives that are happening locally, because once you start to look, once you turn up to a farmer's market, you probably have a farmer's market going on down the road from you or a few miles away, and maybe you've been, maybe you've never been. Go along, talk to the producers, talk to these amazing people making incredible products and the blood, sweat and tears that go into that, and just make some choices to shop differently. That doesn't mean, like Matt says, convenience and price, of course, are important to all of us now more than ever. But you can mix up those choices. You can still do a supermarket run, but then you can also once a month go to a farmer's market and support a local producer who you think is doing some amazing things and making the best sourdough you've ever tasted.
I think it is really important that we kind of really reflect on our own habits. And I guess one of the things thinking about the systems change starts with individuals. And again, from everyone on the panel this evening, we've heard the importance of the choices that we make, which are for us as individuals, but how that impacts and influences the system, right the way through to the learning to cook, thinking about how you use what might otherwise be discarded as food waste. And actually, that's where the change is really driven from. I'm going to go to the audience in a moment and see if anyone has got any questions. We've got a couple of microphones that will float around the room. I can't guarantee that they will work, but they're definitely in the room. We have had a couple of questions from people online. So I'm going to come to you, Jamshid, if I come with the first question. And the observation really is that from your story, what you said, that community larders seem to be really making a difference. And actually the need for these, and are they an engine for driving change within the food system? Or actually are they a response to a point of crisis?
The larders started in Oxfordshire straight after the government parcels with the strictest of lockdown. So it did follow on from that parcel system that I was involved with. Maybe it was a response to COVID. It did get accelerated because of COVID, and then immediately with the cost of living crisis and everything. I think it stays true to sustainability issues. Fair share feeds into, strictly speaking, food banks as well. But again, I have to, I bore people with the word stigma, but I have to go back to that, because even Fair Share at the national scale has noticed that food banks have surplus. Larders have surplus. Just putting food on a table doesn't mean that families will take it. I have a weekly issue with things like pot noodles, where a lot of people have, I call it pot noodle stigma. So I've got a session in West Oxford called Pot Noodle Poetry now. Simply because I think our individual stigmas towards certain foods, certain items, people come into a larder and automatically think, I'm going to pick up the colorful veg and the pot noodle is the unhealthy stuff I'm not going to pick. And I'm going to link up with student life, because when you were talking about students, that took me back to my student years. Pot noodles are an amazing dish if you add these vegetables to it. So it's all about removing the stigma from items and saying, this pot noodle has got a mess of powder or the wrong ratio of powder to noodles. It was going to go into landfill. Do you prefer for that to go into landfill as it is, or open it into a frying pan, add some vegetables, turn it into a healthy dish, and serve it to the family? So that is, for me, is the cycle of fighting the stigma, sharing the love, and making sure everyone loves food and hates waste. If we start saying, at an individual level, community level, healthy food only means one thing, I think we'll quickly end up where we've been for 40, 50 years. We have to have different conversations. I say to a lot of moms and dads who come to my initiatives that, as opposed to what we were saying earlier, to me, McDonald's is not a bad meal. The fries are, but if you install their app, McDonald's currently has an incentive where you can add vegetables to your burger without an extra charge. Whereas if you want to add cheese, they'll charge you more. So even big business are not as bad as we think we are. So we shouldn't be looking at every single institution or big business and say, I'm not going towards McDonald's because that automatically means unhealthy. It's not like that. It's not that black and white.
I think I absolutely agree, and I think from what Matt said as well, that recognition of the need to change and to be leaders in this space. Matt, we've had a question come in as well, asking just really if you could say a bit more about the cooperative side of things, the impact that it's having, the difference that it's making, and how the membership works with it.
Yeah, sure. So we're owned by hundreds of thousands of members. I think it's about 300,000 members now. And particularly on the food justice point, this is something that they've insisted that we invest in and support, not just our cooperative, but members of other retail cooperatives. And at Mid-Counties, we supply 60 different food banks in the region, so Oxfordshire is one of them. And I think it goes back to Ashley's point slightly. This isn't, in an ideal world, this isn't something we would want to or choose to be doing. You know, I think everybody being able to afford good, healthy food on their terms is what we'd all aim for. But this is what our members are saying they need now, and how we can support their communities. And I think it's only right that we should do that. So in an ideal world, in 5 years, there won't be a requirement for that. But for as long as there is, and our members ask us to do it, and we think we can benefit in our communities, we absolutely want to support it.
And I think that, again, it's the reducing the stigma, promoting healthy living, promoting the well-being that goes with that. And again, it all becomes part of this wider food system. The last question, perhaps before I come to the audience, and Sienna, it's aimed at you, is really about what's next for the student front, thinking about reducing waste. A couple of people have clearly seen what you've done online, and they're asking what your intention and ambition with this is moving forward.
I would love to see more workshops and events raising the awareness of the importance of food waste and the environmental impact we make with food, because people aren't aware how much impact comes from food waste. It's not only about the emissions that come from it, but it's also about wasting the whole the process, all the emissions and efforts that were put into producing the food. I would love to be involved with other projects, maybe bigger than that, and aim it at more people, because in this project, it did have an impact, but I also noticed that a lot of the participants were international students, which is great. I think that might be because international cuisines are obviously more cooking involved, but if we try to promote that at British students, it would be great, because overall, I mean, we are in a British university, so mainly the people here are English. So yes, if we promote that, not only that it's healthy, but also that it's affordable, that would raise interest way more.
I think that's a really important point, and thinking about the current financial climate and how it's impacting everyone, but also that it's not just students. And I think that it is trying to turn that culture, think about how we can encourage people to think about what they need to do and how they can change things moving forward. We've just had one more question come in, Andy, which I'm going to come to you with, if I may. And it really kind of jumps off the back of what Sienna said there about the international. And you mentioned earlier on about your support in international context with female farmers. And it's about that kind of global element of the food system. And so the question actually says, how do we address this systems challenge? Is it a globally based challenge that we need to address, or do we need to think of it more locally if we're going to make inroads?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think most of the solutions, as we've heard today, actually are hugely kind of contingent on local community kind of based collaboration. So there's sort of a facilitation role that some of these global organizations can play, whether that's through business models, whether that's through financing and funding. But you know, the Female Farmers Initiative, it's so kind of localized in terms of what we're providing, and it's so community based. So we're provisioning, in that example, the big corporates, there's sort of pharmaceutical companies, there are energy companies, but we're provisioning access to renewable energy at a local level, which has to be delivered through NGOs that have trust and understand the communities at a local level. That's then sort of industrializing some of the farming processes, which then frees up resources, like pumping water and things like that, which then frees up resources so that females, women and girls can sort of get access to childcare. That stops the children working as much, which means they can get access to education. So these things are all so connected, but each individual community manages that in a very different way. The big companies provide some of the infrastructure and some of the funding, and even access to finance when you don't have bank accounts or credit ratings. And so all those kind of things are very localized. So I think there can be global solutions, but ultimately it's very human. Even in the big corporations, it's a very human thing. It comes down to people kind of looking after them. A lot of what you've been saying is it's about, it's sort of, without sounding too emotional, it's kind of about love and nurturing communities and then seeing what role a big company can play within that and how you can facilitate and support that. So it's a human challenge that you have to sort of look at all levels, but ultimately the real, you know, I was sort of volunteering in a nature reserve on Monday, and you know, you're grafting and you realise the real hard work that goes into, you know, a 10-acre nature reserve in Oxford, and it's, you know, that's where the real change happens. And I'm off on one again, but I think that's maybe that goes some way to answering the question.
Well, I think it really does, because we can't address this and kind of the elephant in the room if we are going to kind of consume it, so to speak, or metaphorically. We need to do it by chunks. We cannot simply just change the system. It requires those interventions. It requires understanding the relationship between the different components, and ultimately that this is a human-centric challenge. I mean, we've got to have people at the core of this. We see that there are organisations, that there's regulation, but it is about people beginning to drive some of that change in their own daily behaviours, in their small ways that will actually make a difference. So
it's awareness as well. I mean, I'm going to be walking up and down the supermarket. That was a fun fact. Because quite often I put something back in naughty in the wrong place, but I never think that. So it's an education process as well.
And it really does, and it comes back to, I think, what Sienna was saying. It's awareness to start with, it's understanding, and then it's the change that's driven off the back of that. At that point, I'm going to go to the room. We've got a hand up down the front, which is great, so we will find you a microphone and hope it works, and then we'll go to the middle as well after that. If any others have questions online, please do feel free to add them to the Q&A as well. If you could say perhaps who you are and share the question.
Hi, thanks. My name is Sophie. I am mostly here out of personal interest, but I also volunteer with Oxford Mutual Aid, which does food distribution. There's been a lot of talk about the role of large companies, but also the role of the local. And I'm wondering, ultimately, what is the role of large companies when you've talked about the need for local, you've talked about, transport and issues. When systems scale up, is there a degree of waste that is inevitable that you would not necessarily find at a local level? You talked about moving away from the David and Goliath, but without attacking large corporations specifically, is there an issue with the concept, given that we've the first Oxfam famine issue addressed was in 1942. We've known about it for 80 years minimum, and love and goodwill hasn't stopped it yet.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I'm going to go to Matt first, if I may, and then Ashley, I might bring you in as well.
Thanks. Sophie, was it? Sorry.
Sophie, yeah.
Thanks, Sophie. So the first thing I'd say is attacking big companies is good because, like I said, I think consumer demand or interest is ultimately what will change big business. And there are lots of factors that can influence big business, but I think that's probably one of the most influential. And I say that as somebody who works in a big business that's constantly in contact and trying to learn from its customers. I think there are some good examples of where food sustainability initiatives have worked at scale. The most obvious one is something like fair trade. So at mid-counties, that's had a tremendous influence and has had is something our members are extremely passionate about. So I think working with and embracing big business on this journey, for me, is going to be critical in creating systemic change. I think it's unavoidable, as much as I'd love to think of it being managed and driven solely at a local level. I think that's something, partnerships with big business is something we're going to have to do. And I think the clock is also ticking on this. We need to create change soon on food sustainability and many other topics. And I think working with big business, I think we're more likely to do that quicker. And I think just in the last 10 years, I think we have seen rapid change. One of the systemic changes that we didn't really discuss a lot is access to capital and finance. So for big businesses, a lot of access to funding is on the condition of operating in a more sustainable way. And that's one good example of how big business is being transformed. But just before I came, I scribbled down a few things that encompass food sustainability for a big business like AB InBev, which some people haven't heard of, but is the largest brewer in the world. And it tackles everything from biodiversity and ecosystems. So as the largest brewer in the world, we're also one of the biggest farmers. So I think, in working with businesses like this to change how they farm and manage lands is something where we've got huge opportunities to create a lot of change very quickly, and we are seeing that. We have land and food security, we have supply chain visibility and transparency, we have public policy, we have responsible sourcing, we have emissions and energy use. So it's such a broad topic, and these things that big businesses have huge influence on. I think it would almost be a massive missed opportunity if we weren't embracing big business and trying to transform them. And I think first and foremost, I think the opportunity to do that comes from consumer demand from what we pick and how we put pressure on big businesses to change how they think about food sustainability. I hope that's answers some of it. It was such a great question, so wide-ranging.
I'm going to ask Ashley to pick up as well. I think it's really true, Matt, and I think that one of the things that strikes me, certainly on the regulation front, we know that big businesses have to report, they have to comply, which is something that small businesses don't, but it's the working between and of small and large businesses together rather than thinking and trying to polarize them. And Ashley, I was kind of interested when you responded earlier about the way that the Co-op Accelerator was there, the program, the way in which you're kind of working. And I think you suggested as well that you can be innovative in a way that big businesses can't, but that can set the standard. And then we can see big businesses taking on some of those behaviors as well.
Absolutely. I think I used the word sort of prototyping before, that, you know, small businesses can go out and be experimental and take those risks and be pioneers, and, you know, big businesses can learn from them, but it has to be because I think we've seen many examples in the past where actually the big businesses just steal the good ideas from the small guys, and that's the shift that needs to happen, that, you know, larger businesses acknowledge the good work, the hard work, the grassroots community initiatives, the initial road testing that's been done of new technologies, new ideas, new initiatives, and by all means incorporate them. Hats off to Aldi from learning from Sophia and others, but acknowledge the hard work that's gone before. And absolutely, we should get angry at the businesses that are doing things wrong. For as many as are changing their habits and are doing things right, and they're doing all the reporting, and they're being more transparent, and they're being more accountable, many aren't. So we have to still get angry and shout out. But do you know what? Not just for the big businesses, for the small businesses as well. And something that we've not talked about which is becoming an increasing problem, is greenwashing across the board, and, you know, people sort of pretending to do sustainability well. And again, it comes back to us, I'm afraid. We've got to do that interrogation, we've got to ask the questions, we've got to look at the labelling, we've got to call out businesses when we think they're being a bit shady, and that's not going to go away overnight, sadly. And, you know, there can be the danger of that sustainability bandwagon and people ticking a box without actually properly walking the walk. So that's something, but that is something that I wouldn't just point the finger at big businesses, that's smaller businesses as well.
I think the greenwashing is absolutely a really important point. And some of it is actually helping all businesses, all business leaders think about what sustainability really means, what they're doing to kind of move towards net zero and address the kind of climate emergency as well. We had a question in the middle at the back. I think if we could get a microphone, that would be great. Thank you.
Is that okay? Thanks for the talk so far. It's really interesting. I'm Sarah. I'm here as a member of staff and also very interested in the subject. And I wanted to try to pick up on a couple of points that have already been made around, I guess, international comparisons. I was really interested to hear from our student about how international students are more drawn to your project, and that was partly also picked up in relation to Oxford Mutual Aid. So I moved away for a long time and came back. And one of my first observations when I went back into that supermarket space in the UK, and I think there's something we could pick up on here about our locality, our country, is the increased number of aisles with ready meals, first of all. I suppose, almost flip side of what you were saying, Ashley, that in the context I had lived, the farmer's market was the cheaper option. It's where you went first to buy your stuff, and then you went to the supermarket. Here it seems to be almost the opposite to that, and actually the farmer's market is quite a privileged choice. At the end of the day, it's quite expensive. And also seasonality, and I just wanted to kind of maybe ask you to pick up a little bit on your thoughts on that, because in the context I was used to, you really just didn't buy anything that wasn't in season, and that was what was available to you, and therefore you didn't think about what wasn't available to you. It feels like we've arrived at a point where it's everything all the time on demand. And I get the point about that's what the consumer wants, and I'm really interested to hear on, you know, how we work through that. That's the demand, but where's the kind of education side of it as well that was being picked up by our students? Sorry, I've forgotten your name.
Sienna.
Yeah, and thank you for your contribution. It sounds fantastic, the work that you're doing.
Would you like to respond to that first, perhaps?
Yes, I can agree. When I moved to the UK, I definitely noticed the areas of ready meals, like that's not popular at all, and also markets are so much cheaper in my home country. I think here people think mostly about convenience and don't try making their own meals, like they're not that involved with cooking, whereas I think it's a cultural thing in my home country. Usually, because like we obviously have some traditional cuisine, like your parents or grandparents would try to get you involved in those things, whereas here maybe it's not a thing. I'm not too sure because I haven't grown up here, but definitely people think about convenience more than the impact that their actions can actually do. And it's also maybe in the UK, because it's obviously a richer country, I feel like in slightly poorer countries people are aware of what is more affordable and what isn't. And people should try to promote maybe in a way that it could interest others, because if it's not about being affordable, then maybe try to implement environmental impact in another way of their interest.
I think it's a really interesting point, and picking up on what you said about the kind of going to the farmers market. I mean, having lived in Leicester for a number of years, which has the biggest open fruit and veg market in the UK, it used to be a thing, it was packed multiple days per week, and it's moved to a kind of a situation where it's much reduced many days, even if it's now open. So the kind of habits, the change, I guess kind of picking up on the point about international as well, it's the culture. It is that kind of unfettered consumerism and the wanting things immediately. Sarah also mentioned, I think, the notion of seasonality, and I was going to come to you again, Ashley.
Yeah, the seasonality is really interesting, because actually I think you always have to separate that from culture, because it's in a generation that has changed. I can remember, being in the school cloakroom and opening my lunchbox, and I had a Satsuma and was so excited. It's like, oh, it's Satsuma time again, and that's in one generation that has completely changed. The idea of my kids not being able to have Satsumas on tap is, seems difficult to imagine. So that can't be a cultural thing. That's something that has somehow happened in this country very quickly. And I don't know the reasons behind that. I think we as consumers have driven that largely, and the supermarkets have taken it and run with it. So again, I don't think the answer can be it's simple. It has to be partly us, that we demand buying more seasonably, but if it's there and we want it, we're going to buy it. So I don't know what the answer is, only that if it could have changed so quickly, it must equally be reversible as quickly. It's not a cultural thing. It's not something endemic in our culture as Brits that we want everything on tap all the time. If it changed so quickly, we can reverse it, but I just don't know what the steps are to reverse that. Does anybody else have the answers?
Got two more questions, so one there, and then we'll come to the centre afterwards.
Just connecting with what you've said there, and that you mentioned beforehand about the idea of greenwashing, and that there's often a trade-off that we seem to have with if something's sustainable or being promoted as being more sustainable, or like farmers markets, they seem to be more expensive. So you have to be able to afford those sustainable options, or they maybe, have a shorter shelf life or things like that. Or like, I think it was Saman mentioned about the pot noodle stigma being the unhealthy thing, but it would be sustainable because it's going to go to waste otherwise. And that a lot of the time maybe sellers or companies do use that greenwashing as a way to make more money. So if it's got the sustainable brand or labeling, they can then charge more because it's better for the environment. And we talked a lot about how consumers need to drive the demand, but do you think there should be maybe a more top-down way where maybe there's some sort of punishment for the supermarkets if they don't incorporate sustainable things rather than them getting a financial benefit for people buying the sustainable options.
Who would like to address that?
I'll try and answer that, but I want to go to the previous question as well because I have something to say about that. The idea that we're now a society that doesn't have these spikes of seasonal stuff is not my experience of our community. Around October time, I had a spike of me and my community ambassadors picking up pumpkins from across Oxfordshire. So we have a Thursday event, we call it now What Walks. We walk or we drive to places and pick up surplus locally. So I have a working relationship with the Earth Trust, and they call me up when it's time, and we go and pick up hundreds and hundreds. Those of you who have walked into my larder in West Oxford, you have seen for weeks and weeks there was loads of pumpkins that we had picked up ourselves. It hadn't come centrally from Fairshire, it was very local. Again, Botanic Garden, when the time is right, calls me up for apples, quince, that kind of thing, which obviously people don't need when they visit Botanic Garden. And again, we go in with ladders and pick them up, bring them to the larder, family stay there. So there is still some seasonal stuff going on. Maybe we don't notice it in the supermarkets, but if you look at the spikes, you know, the Easter stuff, the Christmas stuff, it's still there. And it involves a lot of waste. But I have to say, as a consumer, I think as consumers, we're guilty. We have driven the industries to come up with these patterns for us. And it does create a lot of waste. The second question was, I forgot the second question.
So I think thinking more about the
punishment
punitive
of
measures,
supermarkets. Yeah, I don't think it will work. I think whatever we do to punish big business means more prices going up. It has to be driven from inside. That's my impression.
I mean, it strikes me as well with the kind of the regulation piece that it needs to be sort of on both sides. I think that the consumer action and reaction to what any retailer does, large or small, will often change their activity. It's not simply about the taxing. I mean, interesting when we look at fizzy drinks and the tax that's gone on that, many people absorb that, they pay a bit more, but then for certain consumers in certain groups, we do see that change as well. I'm conscious that the lady in the middle has been waiting patiently, so just towards the front, in front of the gentleman.
Thanks, Rudy. Hi, my name's Harriet. I'm also here as a member of staff and very interested in food. I try to grow a lot as veg as I can. And what I wanted to talk about comes back to this idea about food preparation. You know, we've talked about where it's sourced, all of the chains of delivery along the way, but it's that interest in food preparation that I'm curious about, and the concept of slow food. You know, we've got fast food because we have massively growing populations, a lot more people in work. That whole shift into who's in work and gaining access to work is grown in importance in the last few decades. So you've maybe lost that connection to how you prepare your food and when and why you do that, but you still want that convenience. So has the slow concept of food where you might have community kitchens, or you've got food markets where maybe they're accessing local produce from the local farm areas? I'm just wondering if I could rattle on about that concept, but just to say, is that concept being talked about in the food larder or in big business? Is that a way of thinking about that stepping stone between just preparing the food or preparing ready meals, but then talking about how you're trying to reduce stigma or food consciousness at the other end of the actual preparation end? So as a stepping stone, is that something that's being talked about?
Thank you for that. And before I open it up to the panel, we've had a question in online which kind of, I think, builds on the concept of education around food as well, and making people more aware in their understanding. And the observation, perhaps, rather than a question, was made around how could we get pot noodle eaters to potentially think about those healthier options, educating them, but what's the role of bigger business in this? So it's not just about the buying, the selling, the retail piece of food, but food education. So maybe, Saman, if I come to you first, and then I'll offer Matt a chance to kind of respond as well.
So pot noodle thing is very specific. But the first question, I forgot the first question.
So the first question, thinking about slow food.
Slow food, okay. That's already happening. It's slow, but it is happening. A lot of our larders in Oxfordshire are linking up to food places. Only in the last 6 months, I've launched Botley Community Kitchen. We're cooking 3 sessions per week, and we are almost 98% surplus based. Before this session tonight, I was in Seacourt cooking. We served 76 portions. You can go on Facebook and look at it. It had tins of pear, sprout, soya sauce, and peaches in it. And it was a curry and rice. The rice had mixed herbs from Food Hub, which are Italian mixed herbs, but there's bags of it going out of date, so we chuck it in the rice. So it is possible. There's initiatives. Closer to this side, you've got Waste to Taste in Temple Square. North Oxford, Kidlington, you've got Emily and Cherville Collective. They have a kitchen there. Where else do we have things similar? Flo's Cafe in Florence Park. They do similar things. The Syrian Sisters do similar things. The fire station, city centre. I'm just lucky that due to my employment at Brookes, I'm privileged to be able to do it all on a completely charitable basis. So it is happening. As a trustee to Sophia, I know as I speak, I'm in evening Zoom calls. We're setting up a massive kitchen in the warehouse for our kids in the main warehouse who could potentially use the surplus, cook a meal. We could freeze it slightly at the industrial scale and send the frozen ready meals into the larders, the 30 larders that we have in Oxfordshire and beyond. I know Food Hub likes to do the same thing if they had room and funding. And there are other groups who are thinking about the same thing. It is the natural next step. And if I see the day that I could turn every pot noodle into a healthy meal, that would be amazing. But it means more packaging.
And so Matt, maybe just again reflecting that it's not just about what businesses do and don't do around sales. I mean, the education piece, I think, is a really interesting angle.
Yeah, and look, I think big businesses, in terms of one of the things we can do is we can help educate customers. I think we have a platform to do that like no other. And I think there's a couple of things I'd like to say on that. So firstly, a business like AB InBev, we are one of the biggest advertisers in the world, and the things that we say in our adverts matter to people. So Budweiser is an example. And look, I'm not here to be the face of big business, by the way. Like, I started a very small business, bought by a big one, so I'm kind of in between. But we're currently running almost all of our adverts focusing on the fact that Budweiser is now brewed with 100% renewable electricity. And that's not greenwashing, that's true. And I think that does trigger consumers of one of the biggest beer brands in the world to think about the production of their beer and how it's done and doing it in a more sustainable way. So I think there's that avenue we've got to educate customers. But earlier I said about how we're led by consumers. And I think one of the worst things you can do as a business is just ask customers what they want, because they'll say they want it quicker and they want it cheaper. And that's a surefire way to sort of sustainable oblivion, I think. But what we can do, well, I think the famous adage was something like, customers don't know what they want until you show it to them. And I think one of the problems we've got is people don't know how unsustainable their food is. So if they go into a supermarket and they see the pack, honestly, I think most of the people in this room would look at where something is produced and how it's produced. I think the majority of consumers still don't do that. And I think the good news there is, to Ashley's point, I think this is changing quickly. And I think if we take that responsibility on, so for the co-op, for example, that could mean educating people in store. It could mean working with influencers. You know, we've seen the impact that people like Hugh Fearnley-Whittingstall have, and these people with this tremendous platform. How do we work with them to educate customers on what more sustainable food looks like? And I think if we start there, we can really change the way people think and see food, and then ultimately change what they demand from us as businesses, small and large.
Thank you for that. Did I see one question at the back, and then we'll begin to wrap it up.
My name is Nigel, and I'm a member of staff. One of the things that concerns me is inertia, big business inertia. And the points that you've been making, I think, are really good. What I'd like to do is relate a story. I go back and forth to Germany because I have a sister there. And one of the things that really frustrates me, I digress, is the amount of wrapping that I throw away. I've been in correspondence with one of the senior people at Sainsbury's, and they won't do anything because they say customers like the wrapping. When I was in Germany, in Baden-Württemberg, the Green Party made it a requirement that supermarkets had to park outside a skip or 2 skips so that customers could discharge all the wrapping on the supermarket's premises. A couple of years later, I went back, the skips had gone, so had a lot of the wrapping, but also there was a transition away from plastic to bottles. The plastic bottles disappeared. And so I think this business of educating customers is absolutely key. And I just very delighted. The other observation I make is the importance of pushing up as well as pushing down. 2 good points that were made by you all, and it's encouraging.
Thank you for that, Nigel. Matt, do you want to say something? Because I know your kind of the emphasis on the circular economy and what you're doing is very much at the heart of the kind of the initiative you're currently working with.
Yeah, the challenge is who drives that change? Is it the supermarkets? Is it the manufacturers? In my case, working for a big brewer on Perfect Draft, I suppose it's manufacturer-led. So we are. So hopefully, can you hear me, Nigel? If I. Okay, cool. Yeah, so it's manufacturer-led. So the onus is on us without the supermarkets even pushing us to look for alternative solutions, and now we're looking to scale that, and we're growing really quickly. To your point on the speed of innovation, I think we've grown from 50,000 to hundreds of thousands of customers in the UK in a few years. So I think it is changing quickly, and I don't think there's a single solution for whether it's supermarket-led, manufacturer-led, big business-led, small-led. I truly think it is all of us demanding change quicker that we're going to see any progress.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm going to wrap it up there, but before I do, we've had a couple of more comments online who have said how inspiring they found the stories coming out of the panel. And this isn't about big business bashing. It's about recognising that there is a system, that there are ways that we need to improve the system, that businesses are innovating, businesses are changing, that people are changing the system. And I think that we shouldn't forget our own agency in that. And again, some of the really inspiring stories that we've heard from the panellists this evening about how subsystems enable the system as a whole to work better. And I think that that's, again, really important. There's not one big system, there's multiple systems. And really kind of the refining of that and improving how they work is absolutely key to finding a more sustainable food future and one that is more inclusive as well. So I'd like to thank our panellists for sharing their time with us, for sharing their stories with us and the insight. So if we could give them a round of applause. So thank you all. For those of you that are attending online, I think we will be ending shortly, but for those that are here, if you do wish to join us for a fair trade cup of tea or coffee, you can do so upstairs at the back. If anyone has any accessibility issues, then you can also use the lift and take that to the 3rd floor, and colleagues will be up there. Please do ask for any assistance if you need it. But I'd like to thank you all for coming here this evening. I'd like to thank those online. for their participation, and look forward to welcoming you back to an event soon here at Brookes. So thank you very much. Thank you.